We wanted to get some perspective now from the CEO, Glenn Fogel, who joins us not just on the story of your company, Glenn, but also your own personal experience in battling COVID-19. It's been a long road. Maybe you can let our audience know about, first off, what personally you've been dealing with and how you're feeling these days.
Well, thanks for having me, John. And I'll tell you, it's so long ago when I was sick, it seems eons ago. I tested positive in March, so it's been quite a while. I was so fortunate. It was such a short, limited, mild case for me. 2 nights of fever and a headache, and that was it, really. And I actually felt fine before the test actually came back. It took almost a week to get the test to come back. And I know that's so different for so many other people who've suffered so greatly. And unfortunately, living in the New York metropolitan area, unfortunately, I know people who lost their battle with the fight with this terrible disease. And it's really been quite tragic. And hopefully there'll be a vaccine or some sort of a treatment soon, and we'll all be able to get back to normal.
Do you think it gave you different perspective just having that personal experience with it in how you've been navigating the business challenges, which are enormous right now?
Well, certainly having had it personally and living in the New York area and seeing how terrible this disease can be, you have quite an awareness of the danger and the steps that you have to take to protect the safety of your employees, safety of your customers, and making sure that's the number one priority. Absolutely. Before you start thinking about the business, start thinking about the safety. Then once you get past that and you feel you have got that under control, then you start thinking about, okay, how long is this going to go on for? And you see it rolling on and on and on. And it's one of those concerns that we do have is how soon will there be a vaccine and will there be an effective treatment in the not so distant future or not?
So against that backdrop, I'm not going to ask you to know the answer to that because nobody knows the answer to that. But what do you think the road ahead for your industry looks like?
Well, we've come out and we've said with our investors on our earnings call, we said that this is not a case where we're going to come back in quarters. This is going to take years to come back. And of course, we could get lucky and there could be a vaccine soon and things could come back faster. But we think realistically, you have to think in terms of years to get back to what was very good travel business in 2019. It's going to take some time to get back to that.
So what do you do in the meantime? Obviously, you, like so many businesses, have controlled costs, and within that means hard decisions as well, decisions about employees, and then having to also think about running the business with not having some of those employees as well. What has been the biggest challenge short term, just as you're sort of going through the day-to-day operations right now?
Well, you're always trying to think, what's the right size of the company? You're trying to project out something that is very hard to project in terms of what are you going to need over the near term, the middle term, and for the long term. You still have to think about the long term. One of the critical things that could make a difference is how much our government's going to support the travel industry. You know, the travel industry is one of the absolute biggest industries in the world. Employs almost 1/3 billion people. And many of the jobs in the industry are entry-level jobs. These are jobs that enable people to enter the economic workforce and take those first steps up that economic ladder. And we need to have a vibrant travel industry. And I know some of the governments around the world are talking about how can they put together specific programs. And I would just urge everyone in government who's thinking about that this is an area that really does need support. And it's critical for the entire ecosystem around the world of bringing people together. We think travel is one of the greatest industries in the world, helping make the world a better place, and we hope the governments will support us.
So just to sort of set the stage here in Canada, as you know, the federal government has made aid available to a whole host of industries through essentially some emergency lending, some bridge loan programs, along with some of the specific measures that have been put in place to provide aid to people who lose their jobs and a wage subsidy program. But would you like to see the Canadian government essentially provide a big amount of aid to the Canadian carriers, Air Canada, WestJet? Do you think that is needed for survival?
Yeah, no, I've been following that, and clearly providing support to these types of businesses and help maintain employment is great. But we need even more than that. It's obviously it's Canada, it's the States, it's Europe, it's Asia, everywhere. We need to provide programs actually promote demand to get people to start traveling again once it's safe. We want to wait until it's safe and people feel comfortable getting on a plane again. But once that desire to travel comes back, well, the economies are in shambles in many places. We need to help promote demand. That could be a tax credit to people to travel. There are lots of different ways to get that money to work to help the travel industry specifically. I love it that the governments have come and helped save jobs in the travel industry, and that's fantastic. I'm just saying we've got to do even more.
Hadn't thought about that, a tax credit for traveling. We'll see what happens on that front. What about in terms of the psychology of travelers? You guys have gathered a lot of intelligence on the trends in traveling for the last decade. What do you think when people do get back to traveling? What do you think are going to be some of the biggest trends with that traveling?
Well, we're seeing it even now. You see some green shoots, so to speak, in certain parts of the world. You see it in Greater China. You see it in South Korea, Vietnam, Germany, and even in the States, and I imagine parts of Canada too, where you're seeing hyper-local travel. People are willing to get in a car if they're allowed in that particular jurisdiction. If there's a province that says you can make a trip somewhere by car, people are doing that. They just want to get out of wherever they are. Their lockdown places have been for months and just go somewhere else. And they're willing just to go 100 miles or 200 miles to do that. That's the start. Then over time, people will feel more comfortable going further and further. But without a vaccine and without effective treatments, one or the other, people are always going to feel not as eager to get on a plane because it just seems such a confined thing. And the airlines are doing what they say will be safer in terms of how they'll handle people and distancing people, et cetera. But I do not think people are going to feel comfortable getting on planes until they feel safe. And safety comes from a vaccine or an effective treatment.
And Glenn, before we wrap up, I've been thinking a lot about what it's going to cost to travel going forward. I mean, certainly the sites that you operate have really helped democratize the process for people who are looking for the best fares out there. But even thinking about what the CEO of Air Canada said on their earnings call recently, that it could take upwards of 3 years to get normal. And when we get there, we'll see a smaller scaled down version of the business, coupled with all the changes they have to put in place for flying. It makes me think of their own costs. It makes me think of what you have to pay to fly for your own tickets. So what do you think of the cost of travel going forward? What do you think that's going to be like?
Well, there's a difference between the short term and the long term. And so when we talk about the long term and costs are going up and the things that you talk about, there's going to be more friction. Airports are going to be tests. Do you have a fever? Do you not have a fever? There's going to be all sorts of added fixed costs into the entire travel system that when costs go up, that can impact prices, certainly. And certainly the case will be the flip side of people will want to provide low prices to get people, attract people into travel. So there's always going to be a balance, I'd say. But I think overall, there's always going to be the right price that enables somebody who wants to travel to get up and go somewhere. And it may be a little bit different than it was in the past. But in the long term, there's going to be a travel industry that's going to be vibrant and it's going to be promoting what we always like is helping the world, helping people experience the world. And I'd say this, there have been pandemics in the past, and there have been pandemics that came where there was no medicine, there was no high-tech medical capabilities. The pandemics do leave. This pandemic will be gone. Now, we don't know how long as we started out when we first talked about it, but it will be gone. And when it is, travel will come back strong.
Glenn, great to get your perspective. Thanks very much for spending some time with us this morning. That's Glenn Fogel, is the CEO of Booking Holdings.